To this now, there is growing outrage of Afriforum and Solidarity's recent trip to the United States. Asking the White House officials to fund what they call the Afrikaner development. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa, reacting to this, is accusing the lobby groups of sowing divisions within the country. Let's speak now to the ANC. Its spokesperson is Mahlengi Bhengu-Motsiri. Ms. Bhengu-Motsiri, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, Koli. Thank you very much for having us.
Well, thank you for being here. Can I start with what is essentially very, very terrible news coming out of KZN? People once again affected in that province by floods. And just earlier, the Minister of Kokta making an admission that some of the people affected there are repeat victims of the 2022 floods.
Absolutely. It is something that is terrible. And I think we should join everybody else in the nation to condole with those families and sympathize with those families and communities that have been affected by these floods. And more importantly, though, really call for swift action on the part of the relevant government agencies, including the Department of Kokta, working with a number of other agencies of government to ensure that the disaster management strategy of the country and provinces kicks in as immediately as is possible, and to also pull resources from elsewhere in order to attend to this urgent need that has arisen.
Is there something that perhaps is not being done about that situation in eThekwini, to be specific? Because the minister was quite clear that the people that were allocated or that were put in community shelters, firstly, it's not conducive for whole families to sit in community halls because there's no privacy there. And he says, ultimately, these people decided to move back to where they had come from, which was those disaster-prone areas. Surely someone is to blame. How many years later that these people were waiting to be allocated proper land?
Well, I suppose it's a land issue as well on its own. I think we must carefully examine the reasons for this particular instance, the reasons underpinning these floods that have just arisen. We need to understand what lies behind that and the role of the community involvement at all levels in terms of ensuring that we secure places that are not habitable, and that in fact we work together with government, that where certain places have been identified as unsuitable, that we don't have a situation where our people go back there. It's just a reality that is not something that government alone with the best of resources can resolve. It's not only happening in KZN. We've had many incidents of that nature in South Africa where communities placed elsewhere and then they move back. Yeah. In the ideal world, everybody should have decent shelter in, under conditions of decency, in the land that is habitable, that is meant for that purpose. But indeed, with the growing population, we also have to take into account the effect of in-migration on the budget of government. Yeah. And certainly, without taking anything away from what government must do better, I do think that it is a joint effort between our communities, between business, and also strengthening the capacity of municipalities to have rapid responses as and when these things happen. We're unlikely to see the end of something of this nature for as long as the in-migration patterns in South Africa are the way they are, particularly in the most populous provinces such as KwaZulu-Natal.
Yeah. Can I move the conversation to the news that we woke up to today about the United States cutting funding, AIDS-related funding? It's not just to South Africa. There are other countries as well that were benefiting from the PEPFAR funding. Are you worried as a party in government, that this is going to affect the fight against HIV/AIDS?
I suppose any party that is in government or any other party that is here because they care about the plight of South Africans would have to be worried, not so much about the fact that the US has cut the funding or is cutting the funding, but more so about whether we have sufficient resources to address the challenge of HIV and AIDS in our country, and whether we have that which is sufficient in the kitty of government to meet the demands of the moment. What does comfort us as the African National Congress, and this is something that is lost to many people that are speaking about the funding cuts by the US government, US administration, is the fact that indeed the spending, the health spending on HIV and AIDS is quite significant on its own. An impression gets created that much of our funding is coming from PEPFAR. Yes, PEPFAR has made a contribution, and you can't take that away from that intervention. But it is important to note that almost 70%, it is from our own national budget. And of course, government will have to reprioritize so that the needs of our people are met. Yeah. And so I think the most important thing is to look at the national budget and how the national budget gets reorganized in such a way that access to healthcare in South Africa isn't compromised as a result of any withdrawal of aid. It is a lesson for the future as well, that we need to drive for sustainability. Yeah. And I think according to Dr. Motsoaledi, he's really repeated this point time and time again, that funding towards HIV and AIDS in South Africa is significant enough to absorb the shocks that we have. Yeah. I'm certain, and I'm not discounting the withdrawal of funding, but I'm certain that government will be able to carry the burden that it has to carry in order for our people to continue receiving the treatment that they require and other measures to combat HIV and AIDS.
You see, the manner in which you've answered that question, it lends us perfectly into another subject matter, and that is that of the budget that is going to be delivered by the Minister of Finance.
Well, I knew you were going to go there anyway.
So I'll be quick about it. Is the ANC in favor of this 2 percentage point increase in VAT in order to meet the challenges that you speak about, that government has to rise to?
Well, we, as a party, we have elected to allow government under the leadership of the Minister of Finance and his team, led by the President, to go back to Cabinet with a reviewed budget proposal. And at this stage, I'll really be spoiling and soiling the party if I were to now jump ahead as the ANC. Where we are concerned as the ANC is that none of the things that are aimed at redressing the past imbalances, none of the spending items that are aimed at ensuring that the transformation legislations that we have passed are compromised. None of the things that we have done by way of social protection, social security, by way of access to basic services, those items that are funded by the state to a tune that is unprecedented if you look at global indicators, must be undone, because we will be reversing what is a positive trend about 30-year democracy in South Africa. In terms of options available to grow the national kitty before Cabinet, all of those options that are available must be explored. Yeah. And so at the right time, we will then make our own pronouncement once we ourselves have received a briefing from the President and our colleagues in Cabinet at our upcoming meetings.
All of the available options must be explored. Would that be a roundabout way of admitting that the ANC is not in favor of a VAT increase?
I think
I'm really being brief.
Yes, I'm really being candid here to say that we are subjecting it to a process. There's a lot of work that's being done by even our own research team to inform and to evaluate these proposals coming from government, so that when we do comment about our stance, our final stance, it's on the basis of the data that is before us, both from our own internal research as well as the work that is being done in Treasury. And so let us leave it at that. We are hoping, though, whilst we're on that subject, Colin, that when the House convenes again to have the introduction of the appropriation bill, that the country will unite around that budget cabinet will unite around that budget. In any case, there's no room for a divided cabinet, which is why it is unheard of in South Africa that you can have members of cabinet that go outside of cabinet and articulate and communicate decisions of cabinet.
Yeah.
It's illegal, in fact, in terms of the oath that they take as ministers, those that have done so, particularly from the Democratic Alliance.
Yeah. Let me then move to Afriforum and Solidarity. They've gone to the United States once again. The president expressing his displeasure today. In fact, his biggest worry, it would seem, is that their continued actions are going to divide the country along racial lines. How dangerous a game do you believe Afriforum and Solidarity are playing here?
It is a treasonous game. If you look at that particular submission they are making in the US, and you go through the several clauses in there, they bordering on basically saying that South Africa should be reconfigured from what it is to something else. They're basically saying that they've not been happy with the transition to democracy and an end to apartheid, and that they're actually looking for something by way of a return to apartheid, and that no, if you can't get us there, then give us our own piece of land where we can live differently to the way we've been living in the past 30 years. It is a sad thing. It is a sad thing, but it is incumbent on South Africans to rise up, isolate right-wing extremism in our country. It's not going to be done by a political party. It's not going to be done by government alone. Government, of course, is already doing a lot about that, including the president clarifying his counterpart, using the envoy and other mechanisms that are going to follow. But ultimately, South Africans must protect their democracy. South Africans must protect the project of building and fostering national unity, which is a very difficult exercise.
Not to put words in your mouth, you're quite clear that them asking for funds to build what they call Afrikaner development, it would seem that they are asking for separate development, which is what apartheid was. And so that fight has been fought already of separate development. The question is, someone listening is going to say, but under the ANC government, places like Orania have been allowed to exist. How does the Premier of the Northern Cape justify the existence of an Afrikaner enclave, Orania?
Well, a big part of what has happened in South Africa, including the fact that we have a society or parts of society that can even tolerate organizations such as the Afriforum, and that they still have the legal recognition, is in part the sins of our democracy. We have created a dispensation that is lauded worldwide, but that same dispensation, like any other thing that is good, has produced its own challenges. And I think we must all acknowledge that there are those that seek to overstretch the limits of a democratic framework. And so we need to make sure that we work harder to protect this democracy and not to allow extremism. Orania is extremism. And I think the extent to which we act on those things, including us as the ANC calling on government to really help to protect the constitution, the unitary state that we are, and to ensure that what Afriforum and Solidarity are marching and talking about is frowned upon by all our people. We need to educate our people, including the young ones, about all of this. So all of us have got a civic duty. There are those, of course, that are taking them to court, and as the ANC, we will not stand and stop those people or seek to stop them, discourage them. We're not going to be doing anything of the nature. We believe we must continually conscientize our people against the dangers of extremism of whatever kind, particularly white supremacy and particularly right-wing extremism.
Finally, Ms. Bhengu-Motsiri, you have reconfigured the two leadership structures, Gauteng and KZN. Simple question. Are you not worried that this is going to divide the ANC?
No, not at all. Why are we not worried? We're not worried because leadership and the exercise of leadership requires that certain moments you do take decisions that are aimed to correct. If those decisions are taken in the best interest of the organization, they are not going to cause divisions. But if they are taken for punitive reasons, indeed, they will land there. We are confident that the decisions to reconfigure the two provinces, their leadership, KZN and KwaZulu-Natal, those decisions were informed by a very thorough diagnostic assessment post-elections, where we came, including our research, internal research, where we came to a conclusion that not doing anything about these two provinces, including reconfiguring its leadership, to strengthen the leadership, to ensure that we have teams that work in these two provinces, work harder, and teams that have got a better insight into the needs of the province, better insight into the needs of the professional class, the middle class, amakhosi, faith-based communities, and good understanding, even a nuanced understanding of what makes up the landscape called KZN and the landscape called Gauteng. So we certainly believe that it is a unifying decision. It's not the first time that we have had dissolutions or amendments of this nature to a structure. The NEC is empowered by the Constitution to do so in between conferences. So there is no challenge about that. And we look forward to seeing our own branches, our members and supporters being re-energized following a poor electoral outcome in the two provinces, but being re-energized by having the leadership that has been brought in, veterans, people who have walked the path. If you have a Jeff Radebe in KwaZulu-Natal, he had been a chairperson of the Southern Natal region of the ANC during very, very difficult times. Sbundebele and many others that have been brought on board. I can say the same about Gauteng. These are people who are respected, who are trusted, who are also not questioned in terms of their competence, both as government leaders as well as leaders of the people. And so we are quite comforted that this is going to put the ANC on a new footing nationally, not just in those two provinces.
Mahlengi Bhengu-Motsiri, thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you very much, Xoli.
Thanks indeed. National spokesperson of the African National Congress.